You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Cleveland, Ohio, 2006. After a chance encounter, three people soon find out that life can sometimes thrust us into the public eye, even when taking great measures to avoid it. Cooper Madison was the best pitcher in baseball after being drafted number 1 overall in 1996 from the small Gulf Coast town of Pass Christian, Mississippi. 1 year after announcing his sudden and shocking retirement, he finds himself seeking anonymity in Cleveland, Ohio. Kara Knox is the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. After a tragic work accident to her closest relative, she has built up a tough exterior as she begins her final year of college at Cleveland State University. Jason Knox, Kara's oldest brother, is the lead detective on Cleveland's Edgewater Park killer case. After months without a suspect, he's feeling the heat from his media-hungry chief. Serendipity intervenes, and all three learn that perception and reality are paths that rarely ever intersect. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Hey folks, you really ought to check out Patricia Gillum's Heroes of Corvus series. Book 1 is called A Superhero's Duty, a fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the death of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city are not out of danger. A Superhero's Duty, Book 1 of the Heroes of Corvus by Patricia Gillum. Get this series now. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Loretta Nyhan on the show with me. She's got a fantastic new book. It's called The Other Family, and when you're hearing this, it's release day, and so it's available everywhere that you buy books. Welcome to the show, Loretta.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Hank.
I'm excited to have you on the show, Loretta. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, wow. I started off as a reader. I fell in love with storytellers. I would spend all my time in the library when I was young. I'd ride my bike and just hang out there, just reading. But it wasn't until high school that I had a very influential teacher. She was incredibly important in my life. And she was the one who said, she taught journalism, and she kind of wrote me in to work on the school paper. And at one point I thought, oh, wow, I think I could actually do this. I think I'm actually good at this. And she took me to the side and she said, yeah, you can do this. But I didn't have enough confidence to try to pursue it. As a young adult, I became a teacher for many years. And then when I was about in my mid-30s, and my youngest went to school, I said, this has been pulling at me my entire life. And I decided to sit down and do it. And I started writing seriously.
Nice. Were you a bookish kid? Did you read a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. So much so that I would lock myself in the bathroom and my mom would pound on the door and say, come out and stop reading. It's the only place that I could find that I had some privacy.
Right. I can attest to that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the early stories that just captured your imagination and transported you to another world?
I loved mysteries, and I fell in love with Nancy Drew, like, every other 9-year-old girl. And I couldn't get enough. And luckily there were, I don't know how many, over 100. And I just plowed through them and I read them again and again. And I think that's common among writers, is that we read things over and over, and we'd like it to kind of sink into our soul. And it sounds a little goofy, but that's kind of what happens. And that's what happened with Nancy Drew Mysteries. I could not get enough. And they're wonderful stories. They're very compact and perfectly written. So I think that kind of sung into me. And I loved it. Could not get enough.
I think I could tell that you are a mystery fan. There's something about your writing, even though the new book is not what we'd consider a mystery. There's a mystery writer's flair to the way that you unravel things and keep the narrative going. Do you feel like that influence has stuck with you?
Thank you. First off, that's a really nice compliment. Yes, I definitely do. I think my job first and foremost is to entertain and to continually surprise. I want people turning the pages. I want them to not expect what's going to happen on the next page. And I definitely got that from my obsession with mysteries. And it's I find that very important. I don't want anyone to feel like they could, I could set this down for a little while. You want people to be completely enthralled. And yes, I definitely think that happened from reading mysteries.
You wrote for some national magazines. What brought that about? What took you to writing? I'm assuming nonfiction.
Right. So after I graduated I made the brilliant move of graduating with an English degree without a teaching certificate. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't know what kind of job I was going to get. So I moved to New York City thinking, well, let's see what I can do. And through circumstance, got a job as a receptionist at a magazine company, a media company. And I don't know, I think maybe I'm kind of maybe a little older, but do you remember the true romance, true crime, true professions magazines? Well, they were kind of on their last legs. This is the early 90s. They were on their last legs, and the company owned them. And they said, I was talking to someone, and they said, oh, you like to write. Do you want to write the rejection letters for the stories? Sure. So I was writing the rejection letters, and I felt so bad because people would write in and write their entire life story, and they were horrible, sob stories. And I didn't feel right just making a check mark, like not for us. So I would write back to them and someone took notice and said, "You really like to write. Do you want to try out to write for one of the magazines?" So I did. We had to write a news story in 20 minutes. I'm sitting in a room full of people, everyone competing for the same job, and I ended up getting it and writing for trade magazines for a couple of years.
Wow.
And it was wonderful. Taught me a lot about economy and writing,
Yeah.
making your quick. So yeah, it was great training.
I always, I know a lot of fiction writers who began in journalism and or other forms of periodical writing, and I'm always fascinated in what tools they carry forward with them. You mentioned economy of writing. Are there other things that you feel like that time helped you as a fiction writer that put tools in your toolbox, if you will?
Absolutely. Editing as you go. There's no time when you're writing for a magazine. You're on deadline. So you need to be really sharp as far as picking up any errors, as far as, proofreading, copy editing. You have to learn all those skills and learn them quickly. So I can write fairly quickly as a result, and I edit as I go. So by the time I have a first draft, it's usually not in terrible shape. I'm not one of those people who can just write and go back and delete 20,000 words. That just seems like a waste of time to me. So I can write fairly quickly, and I can edit as I go. Sometimes I wonder if that kind of reins me in a little bit too much, and I have to be careful. But I think it's a good skill to have.
Yeah, for sure. And just being able to edit yourself and to know, to not hold things too precious, knowing what things need to be cut, what things need to shape up, if you will, that's a real skill that just comes with practice, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And William Goldman is one of my favorite writers.
Oh yeah.
And I believe he's the one that's, said go around killing your darlings. And yeah, I'm a really good darling killer.
I love that. I'm a really good darling killer. I think that's going to be a quote for this episode. So what was the catalyst that brought you over to writing fiction? So you knew you were a writer, you knew you were a storyteller, you got your hands dirty, and you had a successful run writing columns and things like that. But what was the thing that pushed you over and made you take the leap toward fiction?
Well, I always felt limited writing nonfiction, and I knew inside that I was a storyteller and I was meant to be doing that. So when I finally had some time, and I told myself, either you do it now or you don't do it. And so that really gave me a shove. And I just kind of sat down and I wrote a young adult novel, which was a mystery. It was a paranormal mystery. And I got an agent, and that went on submission. And while I was on submission with publishers, I was getting involved online with writers groups and meeting writers online and offering mutual support. And do you want to read my work? Do you want to read my work? And I met a woman who said, I have a book on submission too, and we're so stressed out. Why don't I write to you? And you could write back if you want. So she wrote to me as a woman on the home front during World War II, in character. And just every so often in a writer's life, a character shows up just like a gift, just fully formed. And this character, Rita, showed up for me, and I wrote back to her in character. And we wrote back and forth in character. We're both history nuts, so we had, already a good knowledge of World War II, but we did a ton of research. And we showed our agents, and they said, oh, keep going. So we did, and we finished it 4th of July, went to the agents, and they went out in September, and it sold in 2 weeks. And that book is Homefront Girls. So that's my first book. Yeah, my first published novel.
Yeah, and everybody doesn't have that experience.
Pardon?
I said everybody doesn't have that experience.
No, I think it's a great experience. I don't know if I'll ever be able to duplicate that. That was the most intensely creative experience of my entire life. It was amazing.
But that's, when you catch lightning in a bottle, you just have to take a moment and appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
So after that experience of Homefront Girls, which you co-wrote with Suzanne Hayes, how do you what do you follow that up with? That's
a good question. We had another book together called Empire Girls. I really liked writing historical, but I also wanted to write a contemporary fiction. And I like the idea of writing about an age group that wasn't super represented at the time, which is women kind of going into the middle years. So I wrote a book called All the Good Parts. And my agent went out with it, and it sold in a 2-book deal, which was awesome. And then when they were talking to me about the novel, they said, "Well, we think that you write middle-aged coming-of-age novels." And I said, "That is so cool. I love that. Middle-aged coming-of-age." So I kind of slipped into that category, and I've loved writing the stories that have come from that idea.
As someone who is middle-aged and still coming of age, I absolutely love that. I've never heard that. Whoever coined that phrase was brilliant.
Yeah, I thought so too.
So you said that you wanted to write something for a group that was underserved. Why do you think we find ourselves with these whole, gaps? Why had no one ever thought to write a middle-aged coming-of-age book before? There's so many of us that are in this age group that there's such a demand for things like this. Why do you think we have whole sections that need to be filled from time to time?
I'm not sure. I think they're definitely out there. I don't think I'm the first. And there are quite a few now. Mostly focused on women. I think we, as a group, started to value the experience instead of minimizing it. Instead of it being kind of the years where you're rushing around, sandwich generation, taking care of kids, taking care of parents, not paying attention to what's really going on in your life. And I think that people started to say, hey, this is a really important time and it's a powerful time. And you're still figuring yourself out, and that's okay. We kind of are under the impression that, reaching the age of 40 or 50, you should say, hey, okay, I've got it all together. I know exactly what's going on. Well, no, none of us do. So I think understanding that and valuing it was kind of a step forward for all of us.
Besides the window dressing, if you will, of historical fiction, the set pieces are different from writing contemporary fiction, but we're still talking about stories about people. Right. What are some of the differences in writing, current people versus telling an historical story? How do you approach them as a writer?
I think with historical fiction, I felt an incredible responsibility to get it right. I think one of the most terrifying moments that I had as a writer was after Homefront Girls was published. It was initially published as I'll Be Seeing You, and it was re-released years ago. I walked into a book club, and this book club had been meeting for 45 years, and they had all lived through World War II.
Wow.
I thought, wow, if I got this wrong, they're going to be all over me. And luckily that wasn't the case. So I felt an incredible responsibility to that generation and to the character to get it right. And so a ton of research went into it. I talked to as many people as I possibly could. I read letters that women wrote, to their sweeties or back and forth on the home front to get a sense of the language and what that sounded like. And then it kind of seeps into you, and you have to become the character. What lipstick looked like? What would she eat for breakfast in the morning? It's a total encompassing thing, and it has to be. And then you need to get the history. What was going on in her world? What was going on in her small world, in her town? So I called the character reader lives in Iowa City. So I called the Iowa City Historical Society and said, "What can you help me?" And they said, "Hey, we've got this guy, and he's going to call you." And this 90-something-year-old man called me and told me what the streets looked like, what it felt like to live there. And then the broader history, what was going on in World War II, month to month, day to day. So I could use that, she would be reacting to it. So a lot went into that. It's a lot harder, a lot more difficult than contemporary fiction.
One that gentleman that you got to talk to and get the descriptions from, that is a real gift, because a lot of times we don't have the benefit of getting someone's personal perspective there. There are lots of references where you can see photographs of the way, a downtown section would look like then compared to now. But having someone who lived there who can tell you what the difference is, who's lived there then and now, that's a really unique perspective.
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah. Oh, you can go by this diner and they used to smell like, hot hamburgers at this time. Just wonderful.
Oh, that's fantastic. After that, you wrote Digging In, is that right?
After All the Good Parts, yeah, I wrote Digging In. Yeah, and that book is really close to my heart.
The Digging In it is a very lighthearted take without being too lighthearted. There's a certain there's a word I'm looking for that I can't find right now. There's a certain tongue-in-cheekness without being cheeky. What was the idea behind Digging In, and what were you hoping to tell with that book?
Well, Digging In is the story of a woman whose husband's passed away, and she's kind of lost control of her life, and she was a control freak beforehand. And she gets kind of tipsy one night and starts digging up her backyard and keeps going and decides to make it into a garden, and in the process, kind of healing herself. So I started writing it, and I got about 30,000 words in. And my husband went off to play golf and never came home. The next time I saw him, he was in the hospital. He'd already passed away. He had a heart attack on the golf course. And I was devastated and couldn't write a word. And my publisher was incredibly supportive, thankfully. And about 5 months later, I was in a bookstore and I ran into another writer. And she said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Terrible." And she said, "Well, how's the writing going?" And I said, "Awful. I can't write a word." And she said, "It's because you only have one story in your head and you need to write that." And so I went home, and Digging In came out in a torrent. I mean, it just flowed. And I got it to my editor, and she said, "Okay, yeah, this is it." And it was actually a wonderfully healing experience for me too.
I had no idea that book had such a personal connection. That is intense.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
I'll bet. Was there ever a point when you're writing this that you're just like, this is too much me in this book. This is too personal. This is too close. You talked about that self-editing earlier. Did those instincts ever kick in, or did the story just flow?
I thought that the story just flowed and that I was being careful and protective. But then my sister read it and said, "Wow, you were really raw." I didn't know you were going to reveal this much of yourself. And I thought, wow, well, I didn't think I was, but apparently I was. The character is very different from me. I'm definitely not type A. I'm more type Z. But she's, there's a lot in there. A lot of stuff I was working through. Then again, I write humorous fiction, so I knew I needed to balance out something like death and grief with humor. So I really tried to do that. And part of recovering from something like that and being able to move forward is finding joy in life again. And so I needed to put some of the joy into the book too.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is that because there is a certain underlying wry humor to a lot of the stuff that you write. And we know that a lot of humor can be based in a dark place. There's something freeing about making a joke about something that's incredibly hard. This gallows humor is some of the best humor, although it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. In the writing, is that something that you ever try to not overthink, or do you have a tendency to want to overthink those things? And does this work? Is this too far? Or have you just learned to give yourself freedom to express that and hopefully that the reader will take it the way it's intended?
That's a good question. My son last Christmas got me a T-shirt that said, "Pardon me while I overthink this." Uh, so I overthink everything. But the thing about about comedy writing, is it for me, it's a lot more difficult than writing dramatic writing, and I I spend a lot of time setting things up, making it seem natural. Because if it's in any way awkward, it's going to stop the reader right there. So I think I spend more time thinking about the funny parts than the not so funny parts. I've always said it's way easier to make a reader cry than to make a reader laugh.
Oh, that's a good point. That is a good point. Your new book, The Other Family. Tell me about Allie Anderson. And this is someone who, looking back, there are a lot of similar themes to digging in, but for very different reasons. Who is Allie Anderson, and how did she come to you?
So I guess I should start by just saying how I came up with the idea. So Allie Anderson, The Other Family, is about a woman whose daughter is suffering from some autoimmune issues, including a severe peanut allergy, in addition to some other things. And Allie's adopted, so she doesn't know as far as if she's inherited any diseases. So she goes to an alternative doctor who suggests she do a 23andMe style DNA test so she can get some knowledge about her medical history. And in doing so, finds out that she has an aunt who lives pretty close by. And she decides to meet this aunt, and all kinds of crazy things happen. So a while back, I was at a party, and everyone was talking about the 23andMe. Have you done it? Have you done it? Were you surprised by what you found? And we were in a group, and one of the guys in the group seemed to be getting kind of angry and upset. And I said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And he said, "Well, I did it, and I found out that my father had a sister that I never knew about. I had an aunt I never knew about, cousins I never knew about." And I said, "Wow, what happened when you contacted them?" And he said, "Well, why would I do that?" And I thought, wow, that's the first thing I would do. So I had that kind of sitting in my head. And then at the same time, my nephew suffers from some autoimmune issues and has a very severe peanut allergy. And a child down the block has an autoimmune disorder that's affecting his liver. And my stepdaughter is a type 1 diabetic. And I just started to notice all these people around me suffering from all different kinds of autoimmune issues. And it's so hard to diagnose. You know, sometimes people just go doctor to doctor to doctor, and they're suffering and they can't figure out why. And so those kind of two things were in my brain and swirled around, and The Other Family came out.
We have a daughter that suffers from autoimmune conditions, and I'll tell you what, as a parent, going from specialist to specialist with a handful of symptoms that don't seem to make any sense together whatsoever, and trying to get someone to not think that you're, just a babbling idiot sometimes, when you find someone who can commiserate with you and can help you to bring some sense to some of that, that is golden. And, reading a book where the author is not afraid to kind of dismantle some of these things that we deal with is a real gift, I'll tell you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
So when you started, you kind of had all these things that you were noticing and thinking maybe there's a story there. How does the storytelling, the writing process begin for you? Do you map it out? Are you an outliner? Are you are there big concepts that come to you and you start writing toward them? Kind of what is your planning and pre-writing process like?
Well, it always starts with character, and goes from there. And once I know her, and what she's about, then the story can kind of unfold more organically. I'm not an outliner for these books. When I wrote a mystery, I absolutely had to outline it. But I'm kind of a pantser with the contemporary women's fiction. And I always have to know, I always need a really great first line before I can start. And then I always need to know how it's going to end. And that's pretty much all I need before I start. And the story just kind of takes off and characters show up. in your head and start talking to you. And I like that freedom. I don't like being confined by an outline. Maybe it would be better if I did, but it seems to work for me.
Well, as a writer who is so conscious of self-editing and staying on track and not wasting time and words, as you kind of described yourself earlier, do those things ever come in conflict? The freedom of discovering the story and letting the characters run wild with the more strict writer that you are?
That's a great question. In order for that not to happen, in order to minimize conflict, I have to live in my head a lot. I'll be walking down the streets. Hey, Loretta, what? Someone spilled milk on the counter. They did. I live in. It's just a constant, mapping out what's going on, what's happening here. I don't suffer from writer's block very often, luckily. And again, I think that's just from knowing your characters really well, knowing who they are as people. They have to be real to you. And if that happens, then it's usually not so much of an issue to, where are we going next? What's going to be happening? Yeah.
Well, one question that people come up with when they hear that a writer is a pantser or writes into the dark or, whatever euphemism we come up with for the way we tell stories like that. One question is that people that are opposite of that is, well, when you sit down at the keyboard, how do you know what to write? Are you just, channeling some spirit? They think that it's, this kind of ethereal thing. But I find when I do that I have been walking around thinking, about situations, scenarios, scenes. And then when I sit down, I'm kind of, reporting on what I've seen in my head. Do you find that happening to you when you say that you live in your head a lot? Are you playing through scenes that are coming up and working those things through?
Oh, yeah, that was a beautiful way to describe it. You've done half a day's work before you sit down at the computer. Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing too is sometimes people perceive writing as you sit down and everything just flows and it's wonderful. And yeah, that it's this otherworldly experience, but it's a job. It's you kind of have to say, okay, I'm going to sit down every day and I'm going to do this. People who are having a lot of trouble writing, the old button seat, that's what it is. And you'll find that if you do that every day, that it's a lot easier to take what's in your head and have it come out your fingers and type away. It's a discipline too. And unfortunately, writers are usually not very disciplined people, but you have to force yourself.
Oh man. Loretta, the book, The Other Family, deals with a lot of, heavy subjects. We're dealing with illness. We're dealing with, broken family connections. We're, divorce, a lot of really heavy stuff in this book. But like we talked about, there's also a lot of humor in here. What would you tell someone, who is having trouble, finding humor in the difficult parts, of life? And, a divorce is rarely filled with humor. Autoimmune conditions rarely filled with humor. We're recording this now in the middle of, kind of a nationwide lockdown with the coronavirus right now, and people are having trouble finding stuff to laugh about. What advice would you have there about finding humor in some of the darker situations in life?
Wow, it feels really difficult right now, right? We've been in the house for a week. For weeks, yeah. I think it comes back to, as I said before, to identifying what brings you joy and focusing on that. Because the lightheartedness usually comes from that. The lighthearted parts of life are the joyous parts. And I think as we're all finding, everything has a silver lining, right? And so being inside the house, stuck inside the house with our families can be incredibly trying and stressful. But at the same time, maybe we could find some things that we haven't had time to do. to find some things that give us joy, that make our heart sing. And I think that's where the humor comes from, is that lighthearted stuff. And I think at some point, when I'm thinking about when I was kind of in the depths of grief after my husband passed away, it was really, really tough. And I probably would have wanted to punch someone who said that to me. Finding joy, what? Huh? But I think at some point you realize that you have to. Because the alternative is to live in just this very dark place. And none of us want to live there. So I think that would be the advice I would give, would be to try to identify and try to remember the things that made you laugh, that gave you that joy and that spark.
Absolutely. The Other Family, when you're hearing this, is on sale now. It's available in Kindle edition and audiobook edition, so if your local bookstore is not open at the moment, you can read it that way. All the money that you're saving on gas from not going anywhere, save it up for the paperback when the bookstores open back up. This is a fantastic book. Loretta, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. If people are just learning about you, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Sure. They can friend me on Facebook. I'm very active on Facebook, and I write a lot of little posts and funny posts to kind of get us through this time. On Twitter, I'm just Loretta Nyhan everywhere, and lorettanyhan.com. Thank you so much, Hank. This was wonderful.
Excellent. We're going to put links to all of that great stuff in the show notes of this episode. Loretta, thank you for taking time to come on the show.
Thanks again. Take care.